Hello, my name is Bree, and I'd like to welcome you to my channel, Breezy Banter, the place where I talk about the things I want to talk about. In today's video, I'm really excited to share the best media that I consumed in Q4 of 2024, and I'm also going to do a wrap-up of all of the media that I consumed throughout 2024. I've said before on my channel that I'm a pretty heavy media consumer in that I play a lot of video games, I watch a lot of movies, and I read a lot of books. I don't tend to watch that much TV, but I do on occasion. So with that in mind, those are the 4 categories that I'm going to be going through throughout this video. So to start with, I'll be discussing my Q4 2024 media specifically first. So there are 4 movies that I want to talk about that I really enjoyed during Q4. The first is the movie Anora, which is a film by Sean Baker. I've seen at least 3 of his other films, and I really enjoyed this particular film. The description for this is Anora, a young sex worker from Brooklyn, gets her chance at a Cinderella story when she meets and impulsively marries the son of an oligarch. Once the news reaches Russia, her fairy tale is threatened as the parents set out for New York to get the marriage annulled. If you're familiar with Sean Baker, you'll know that he puts a lot of effort into his work to humanize sex workers. And that's just not something that I feel like we don't necessarily see that all that commonly in media. And so it's kind of nice to see it from someone who's becoming more and more popular. So it's not just sort of like an underground thing, it's becoming much more mainstream. I think the acting was excellent, and it was just paced really well, and I would highly recommend it. If what I described sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it. As I said, I've seen his other films as well. I think my favorite of his is probably The Florida Project, and then Tangerine, and then Red Rocket. I believe he has another one, but I can't quite put my finger on what it's called. But this Anora would probably be my second favorite after The Florida Project and ahead of Tangerine. So the next film that I saw was called How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. The summary for it is M, a university dropout low on money and luck, volunteers to take care of his terminally ill grandmother in the hope of pocketing an inheritance. And this film has really good reviews. I think I wasn't quite as affected by it as I think a lot of other people might be, but the acting by literally every single person in this film was incredible. Like, from the very old grandmother to the young son, like even the secondary characters, everyone just did an excellent job. I also think it portrays certain human tendencies that aren't always flattering, but does so in a sympathetic light without holding the characters accountable. And so I just really enjoyed this, and I recommend this to virtually anyone. Next is the film Queer. It's described as, in 1950s Mexico City, William Lee, an American expat in his late 40s, leads a solitary life amidst a small American community. However, the arrival in town of Eugene Allerton, a young student, stirs William into finally establishing a meaningful connection with someone. This film is odd, for lack of a better word. If I recall, it's broken up into 3 parts and I believe an epilogue. The first part of the movie seems very normal, seems kind of like a standard movie. And once you get into the second part, it changes into the sort of a magical realism sort of story. That might be a miss for a lot of people. I did enjoy it, and I actually read quite a few articles after the fact to help me process some of what was in the movie, and I found that actually cleared things up for me in a way that made me appreciate it even more. So if you do end up seeing this and perhaps you're confused or lost, I would recommend just reading a few articles, reading a few people's summaries or takes on it, because I found that really did help me process it. And lastly is the film Nosferatu. So this is described as a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. And so I'll be honest, Robert Eggers isn't my favorite director. Like, I've seen The Witch, and I know like people like love that film. I believe it's my dad's favorite film, and it's also my ex's favorite film. But it never really hit for me. Like, I thought it was fine, not bad, but also like I wouldn't want to rewatch it, so not necessarily really all that good either. But I thought that this film was excellent. There were things, I'm bad at critiquing film, but there were things that I feel like I picked up on, particularly like the use of light. I thought was very interesting, and again, acting was fantastic. I think I was confused because I knew that Bill Skarsgård was in the film, and then I found out after that he's Nosferatu, because I kept waiting for him and I was like, okay, well, where's Skarsgård? Where's Skarsgård? And then I learned afterwards that he was Nosferatu, and I was like, oh my gosh, the makeup and his voice is like insane, so good. So I definitely recommend this. I think there are interesting messages. I think it's like true to the time. I kind of trust that Eggers had done research on things that would have been happening during this time frame and kind of stayed true to it, so I also appreciated that as well. Very briefly, I will mention the TV that I watched during this quarter, and I think the only series that I completed was The Ultimatum. And as I said, I don't watch a lot of TV, and what had happened was when I was visiting my family during the holidays, I just started watching the show with my sister, and we like binge watched all 3 seasons over the course of like a week or a week and a half. So would I watch this on my own? Generally, no. Did I enjoy it for what it was during holidays when I just kind of wanted to sit on a couch and mellow out and not have to think about anything? Yes. It's just kind of trashy reality TV, perhaps less trashy than most. And it's a bit of an absurd premise. If you're not familiar with it, basically what happens is couples, I believe 5 or 6 couples each season, come to the show where one member of the couple has given the other member an ultimatum saying like, I want to marry you, and if you don't want to marry me, we're breaking up. And then what happens is everyone breaks up and they find an alternate partner for 3 weeks. They live with them and they have conversations with them. They might have like physical intimacy with them. It just depends. And then at the end of those 3 weeks, they go back to their original partner for another 3 weeks. They live with them. They talk things out. They hash things out, whatever. And then at the end of that, someone has to make a decision as to whether or not they plan on proposing. If they plan on leaving with the partner that they were paired with, that wasn't their original partner, or if they intend on just leaving single. And so it is, to me, it was just interesting. It's always fun, I guess, like I feel like there are certain things that within, let's say, Western society, people are hesitant to talk about, and that includes in particular things surrounding money and relationships. So I always enjoy having sort of a peek into other people's finances and relationships. Of course, there is a selection effect here, like the people that go on the show are willing to go on the show, and so they might be just different than the average person in a relationship. So that's something to keep in mind, but I did enjoy it just for chilling out on the couch. That's all I can really say. In terms of books, there are 7 books that I wanted to discuss. The first is called The Brush Poems. So this book was very interesting to me. It's described as The Brush is an incantatory, fearless exploration of collective trauma and its horrific relevance in today's Colombia, where mass killings continue. Told from the voices Pablo, Esther, and the brush itself, Hernandez Patron's poem is an astounding response to a traumatic event in recent Colombian, the massacre in the village of El Salado between February 16th and 21st, 2000. Paramilitary forces tortured and killed 60 people, interspersing their devastating violence with music in the town square. And so I think at the time that I read this, I didn't actually realize it was based on true events, or it's kind of informed by true events. And I was a bit confused at first. As said, it's kind of told by different perspectives, and it's just horrific when you start to realize like what's going to happen. And then it's made even more horrific when you find out that it's based on true events. So that's a bit horrifying, but the poems were excellent, and it made me feel things that I don't normally feel. Next is the book Something Lost, Something Gained, Reflections on Life, Love, and Liberty by Hillary Clinton. This is the second book of hers that I've read. I read her book from I guess it would have been 2016, called What Happened, which I loved. I know liking Hillary Clinton is like a controversial opinion, even among left-leaning people. I just kind of own that. I do like Hillary Clinton. She's not perfect, but I also feel like I don't have to make that sort of caveat when I talk about other people, but for some reason I have to make it when I talk about her. Don't agree with her on everything. Again, another caveat that I don't often have to make. I think she's smart. I think I would greatly enjoy like a 1 hour lunch with her. And so just reading what she has to say about things has enriched certain parts of my life. I did prefer her first book, What Happened, to this one. But all of that to say, I enjoyed it. And if you're interested in political memoirs, I think this is a great one as far as things go. Next, one of the books that I happened to see when I was at a bookstore with my mom is called Our Bodies, Their Battlefields: War Through the Lives of Women. And I really enjoyed this book. It's a difficult read because you can imagine that during wartime, women are often killed and or like sexually assaulted, which is like the most kind way of saying that. But we often don't talk about that. In the book, there was some stat that unfortunately I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember, but the first ever prosecution for war rape was in 1997, I believe. And that's like horrifying. It just kind of means that war rape can happen and nothing's done about it. And there are quotes from people within the book saying like, well, let's not focus on that, let's focus on this other thing. And it's like, they're like, when you read what's happened to these women and the strength that they have and the things that they've had to deal with, it's to our detriment, I think, to not be aware of this within like the cultural zeitgeist. And I've said before, the big reason that I read a lot and watch a lot of foreign movies and all of that is because I'm interested in perspectives that aren't from sort of like the dominant perspective, which is often that of like a cis, straight, white man. And it's fine if you're any of those things. I'm still interested in what you have to say. I'm just not only interested in that. I do kind of just want to know, what does like a Pakistani woman have to say about cultural events or political events or wartime events? And so things like this just kind of hit, books like this just kind of hit at that desire, I suppose. So this was an excellent book. Huge trigger warning for it though. Like, as I said, it's a long, well, it's about 400 pages and you're reading just about wartime rape for the majority of it. Next is the book, How Will You Measure Your Life? I thought this was, I don't have much to say about this. This was just kind of a interesting, relatively quick read about kind of how to do better within your life and making sure that you're living life according to the principles that you want and not those that other people might have for you. Next is the book Already Enough, A Path to Self-Acceptance. This is a self-help book, and I generally don't like self-help books. I do tend to read them from time to time, but I just find they're often full of like empty platitudes that aren't helping anyone do better, or they're just wildly unrealistic for the vast majority of people. That said, I found that this book like walked that path between holding yourself accountable and also being kind to yourself. And that's kind of the sweet spot for me in terms of self-help books that I actually enjoy. Next is the book Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. I love this book, and there are a variety of reasons as to why, but one of the things that she mentions in it is that if you ask someone to describe a time when they made a good decision, they'll often tell you a decision in which the outcome was good and not necessarily the decision-making process was good. And I thought that was very interesting because you can make a bad decision and have a good outcome. You can make a bad decision and have a bad outcome. Make a good decision and have a good outcome. You can make a good decision and have a bad outcome. So in terms of making a good decision, you shouldn't necessarily look to the outcome exclusively to determine whether or not it was a good decision. In large part because it also just eliminates the role of luck in terms of things that can happen. And so I really enjoyed this book because I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it, and I 100% agree. I think it's really easy to review decisions with hindsight bias, and that's not really the way that I think we should be reviewing things. Next is the book Normal Woman, 900 Years of Making History. Similar to what I said earlier, this is a book that focuses on sort of women's roles throughout, in particular, specifically British history. And it, again, fills that niche that I enjoy of views that are outside of the cultural zeitgeist. Which is not to say, like, for the most part, this book focuses on white, straight, cis women, but white, straight, cis women are still less talked about, learned about, etc. than that of men. And so I appreciated it because I thought it was very interesting, and it was a long book, but definitely worth it. I'm going to skip games for now, and I'll talk about the best games that I played in 2024 in general, as opposed to during this quarter, because I'll be repeating so many of the ones that I have anything to say about. So with that in mind, let's move on to my sort of media stats, figures, thoughts for 2024. So according to Goodreads, for 2024, I've read 103,677 pages across 382 books, which means I average 271 pages per book, or 283 pages per day. The longest book I read was Worm at 6,680 pages. I talked about that book in a prior video of mine, prior media video. I gave 12 books a 5-star rating. I didn't give any books a 1-star rating, which I wish I could say the same for 2025, but it's January 6th and I've already read a 1-star book, unfortunately. The most popular book I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. The highest rated book I read was Berserk Volume 41. And my average rating for the year was 3.3 stars. The 5-star books that I read were The Menopause Manifesto, Eggshell Skull, Appetites Why Women Want, Fireweather, A True Story from a Hotter World, The Body Keeps the Score, Brains, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, The Age of Grievance, White Rural Rage, The Threat to American Democracy, Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will, This American Ex-Wife, How I Ended My Marriage and Started My Life, Already Enough, A Path to Self-Acceptance, The Brush, Poems, and Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, War Through the Lives of Women. So those last 3 were ones that I mentioned during this video. I've also started tracking not just on Goodreads, but also Storygraph for a variety of reasons, but there has been talk of Amazon not supporting Goodreads going forward, and so I'm just scared of losing all my data, so I've been tracking on both Goodreads and Storygraph just in case. And so based on Storygraph, in 2024, the most common moods of the books that I read were reflective, dark, informative, adventurous, and emotional. There was a 53%, 47% nonfiction to fiction split. So just slightly more nonfiction than fiction. In terms of movies, I watched 91 movies in 2024. The movies that I rated the highest in no particular order were Nosferatu, Challengers, Dune Part 2, Monster, Zone of Interest, and There Will Be Blood. And then moving on to games. So my Steam stats for this year are that I played 62 games. The most common genres that I played were Metroidvania, bullet hell, 2D platformer, puzzle platformer, narrative, and MOBA games. The best games that I played for the first time in 2024 in no particular order are Chants of Sonar, Patch Quest, Haiku the Robot, The Past Within, Mo Estray, Ender Lilies, Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, Crypt Custodian, Mini Shoot Adventures, Worldless, Neva, Underground Blossom, and Windblown. And so for the vast majority of these, I've talked about these games in prior videos. If I'm not mistaken, there are 4 games that I haven't spoken about that were the best games that I just mentioned and that were played this quarter. So that includes Worldless, which is like a Metroidvania. It's a stylized Metroidvania game with a big focus on parrying and combat. It's very unique and I loved it. It took me like a little bit to get into it, but once I did, I absolutely loved it. What's interesting is in the credits to Worldless, they thank the studio that created Neva, which is the other game that I mentioned. It's one of the other games that I mentioned. And Neva is the successor to the game Gris, which is one of my favorite games ever. And it's a very similar type of game. It's sort of a action adventure, side-scrolling game in which there is a narrative, but there's no spoken words. And it's a beautiful environment and it's beautifully stylized. One of the other games that I mentioned was Underground Blossom, which is a continuation in the Rusty Lake series. If you're not familiar with Rusty Lake series, there's probably like 9 or 10, perhaps even more games out now. They are point and click narrative games that are very surreal, very weird, very just obscure, kind of gothic in a sense. And so this was I believe this one came out in 2023. I could be mistaken, don't quote me on that, but I finally bought it and played it this year. And last is the game Windblown. And so Windblown is a roguelite and it's in early access right now, but I'm so glad that I bought it and I plan on playing it when they come out with the full release. It's a very fast-paced, as I mentioned, roguelite. The music is great. You can play co-op. I believe you can play with 1 to 3 people, if I'm not mistaken. I only played with one other person, but I'm pretty sure you can play as a group of 3. And it's a lot of fun. It's kind of one of those easy to pick up but hard to master sort of games. I love the style, music, design, just everything really clicked. And then lastly for the year, I think the only TV show that I can really say that was great is Breaking Bad. As I mentioned in one of my earlier media videos, like, yes, I'm a decade late, I recognize that. But aside from Breaking Bad and like The Ultimatum, I'm sure I watched some other TV shows. I literally can't remember them, so they clearly weren't that memorable. I say that now, and I'm sure perhaps there's one show that will like come back to me when I'm editing this or something. But I think the best TV that I watched this year was Breaking Bad. This year I've started Mad Men and I'm really excited for that. So far I think I'm like 5 or 6 episodes into it and I love it so far. So I'm really just excited to see where that goes. So I believe that is all that I have to say about the media that I consumed during Q4 of 2024, as well as the media that I consumed throughout all of 2024. I will try to have a summary of the things that I recommend for 2024 in the description box or as a comment. I hope something that I've said has piqued your interest and you look into it, and if you do, I hope you'll tell me about it, because I love getting recommendations and I love hearing whether or not my recommendations are successful for others as well. So with that in mind, I hope you will like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I hope your 2025 is off to a great start. And I would like to take a minute to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Thank you.